Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rails Common Ground, where every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, we will be featuring conversations with social justice practitioners, change makers, and activists on how we can mobilize our daily actions to radically reimagine our democracy. We'll be going up until the election, which is coming up so soon, so stay tuned. I'm Malvika Jolly, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation coming in from my own home community of the South Side of Chicago, featuring none other than the lovely Tonika Lewis Johnson and Lee Bey for a conversation on one of the most contested, politicized, and deeply cherished locales in the United States. I would say the cultural life of the South Side of Chicago is almost like a, a blank for a number of people. And I hope that today we will be able to fill in a lot of the beautiful art and culture that is found there. We're also so lucky to have the poet and journalist, forgive me for the ambulance. We're so lucky to have the poet and journalist I.S. Jones here with us today, who will read a few poems to close today's program. And now to briefly introduce our guests. Lee Bey is a photographer, writer, and lecturer whose work deals with the built environment and the often complex political, social, and racial forces that shape spaces and places. Lee Bey is one of those people who's worked almost every job in the city of Chicago, lending him an unquestionable level of expertise over all things. He previously served as Deputy Chief of Staff for Architecture and Urban Planning under Chicago Mayor Richard M. Daley, and is a sought-after expert on architectural history and the development of cities. He's a former architecture critic for the Chicago Sun-Times and continues to be a member of the Sun-Times editorial board, where he shapes their position on a variety of issues, including urban planning, land use, and politics. He's the author of one of my favorite monographs, Southern Exposure, The Overlooked Architecture of Chicago's South Side, which came out less than a year ago through Northwestern University Press, and which is a fabulous book which showcases the architectural photography and social commentary for which he is now acclaimed. He teaches a class based on this book at the Illinois Institute of Technology and explores how race has historically shaped and continues to shape architecture and urban planning in Chicago's South Side, as well as other communities of color across the country. His architectural photography, his writing, his reporting have been widely published in the New York Times, Architectural Digest, Chicago Magazine, Architect, Old House Journal, a number of European publications, and he's frequently interviewed by a range of media outlets, including the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, TV Monde, WGN-TV. He's been on WBEZ, Chicago Public Radio, and he's lectured widely before audiences at the University of Hamburg, University of Michigan, the Art Institute of Chicago, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and quite a few more. Lee Bey lives in Chicago's historic Pullman community, where I was once his neighbor and friend, and he has 3 adult daughters. Next up, nothing but illustrious guests over here. We have Tonika Lewis Johnson. Tonika Johnson is a photographer, community organizer, educator, and lifelong resident of Chicago's South Side neighborhood of Englewood. Through her artistic practice, she explores the legacy and lived reality of urban segregation in the city of Chicago and documents the nuance and richness of Black life in her home community. Her seminal folded map project visually investigates disparities among Chicago residents, while also bringing these residents into dialogue with one another across the divide of residential segregation. And in the 3 years since its inception, Folded Map has been used as an educational tool, an advocacy tool, a tool for community organizing, as well as a much needed policy framework. And Tonika has continued to invite neighbors to open dialogue and question how we're all socially impacted by institutionalized racial conditions that aid in the segregation of our cities. Tonika Johnson is a 2017 Chicagoan of the Year. She was named a 2019 Leader for a New Chicago, and she was recently appointed a member of the Cultural Advisory Council of the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events by the Chicago City Council. Her work has been exhibited all over the place, truly. So I'm going to transition. I'm going to hand it over to Lee now, so he can continue to tell us in dialogue with Tonika all about their amazing work. So Lee, take it away.
Well, thank you very much. I must say I've been looking forward to this day for 3 years now. Tonika and I are, sort of in the same vineyard. We're both South Siders, and we've never met in person, although we follow each other on social media and, give each other congratulations and stuff. So this is a great day for me. It's the closest we'll come, but not the closest we'll ever come to meeting in person. So I am so glad to be here and to be able to chop it up with you about these issues. We got so much ground to cover, so let's just jump right into it. I want to talk about folded map, of course, and how fascinating it is. And for those of you who are not from Chicago, Chicago is a city that's longer north and south than it is east and west, right? So if you get west of State Street, west of Halsted, especially, you'll see streets on the south side with the same names as streets on the north side. I think every South Sider at some point in their life has found themselves on North Hermitage and think, wow, there's a Hermitage over here too, that kind of thing. And it looks completely different. So talk about your pathway to getting there, both going back to high school, but also the more recent sparks that led you to this project.
Oh, thank you for that question. So, the seedling of the idea of folded map definitely started in high school, freshman year, 1993, as a 13-year-old. Yes, I was 13, starting freshman year in high school. My birthday's in November. The reason I'm clarifying is because someone questioned that in another presentation. They were like, how are you 13 starting high school? Well, it was 1993 and they didn't have the September rule. But either way, if you were a teenager in the 90s in Chicago using public transportation, especially if you were Black, more than likely you were traveling outside of your neighborhood for school. And oftentimes there's huge population that is traveling significantly far. So at the age of 13, I started that commute. I was living in Englewood and my commute was about 15 miles. So I definitely had to be at the bus stop annoyingly at 5:45 a.m. to make it to school at 8 o'clock. And it was on that commute using public transportation that I began to really see the difference between my neighborhood and the neighborhood that my high school was in. And it just surprised me. And I had never really noticed that difference before. And I was just struck at the clear difference, even at that age, of what I could notice. I noticed, that my neighborhood had so many storefront churches, that it had a lot of fast food restaurants, not a lot of boutique stores in comparison to that being in abundance in the neighborhood that my high school was in. And, particularly interesting to me was also the streets. That was my first time realizing what you just, explained to people, that the streets that exist in Greater Englewood also extended miles and miles north. And I remember thinking on that commute every day, like, oh my God, like Western and Halsted and Walcott and Paulina, they don't look the same in my neighborhood. And,
Mm-hmm.
that just stuck with me. But more importantly, it was my experience in high school that paralleled those observations of disparity. Lane Tech has the largest student body of Chicago public schools. It's 4,000 students with 1,300 being incoming freshmen, and the entire school, and this, Lee, it's on an entire city block because it used to be some old factory that was repurposed into a school. And so it's just enormous. And so every day I would get introduced to new kids from around Chicago who were from all over the city. It was really my first experience of being immersed in the racial and national nationalities represented in Chicago. And, I must note that in the 90s, selective enrollment high schools in Chicago, they were able to curate the racial demographic of their student body to reflect the racial demographic of Chicago. So you had equal percentage of each race in Lane Tech. And so that just afforded me the opportunity to really get to know cultures that I would not have known otherwise through my actual friendships. I refer to this in the Folded Map film that just came out. It was my first time making mistakes talking about race and getting corrected by my friends. I mistakenly thought that my Filipino friends, I thought they were Latino because of their last names. And I was able to have them tell me, no, we're not Latino. This is why our last names are this way, colonialization. I had my friends who were Mexican and Puerto Rican tell me the distinct difference between their cultures and really enforce that I better not get it confused. And then, I also had my friends who were Asian who told me all of what being Asian includes. They're like, no, it's not just Chinese and Japanese, and really informed me about cultures as well as, white people who grew up in Chicago. I had not really interacted with them until high school. And then of course,
because Chicago is really hyper, I mean, I think it can't be said enough that Chicago is
yes.
a really hyper segregated city. And like me, I mean, you can get into your teens or beyond before you really encounter someone of a different race than you if you remain in your own neighborhood.
Yeah, and a lot of Chicagoans, even as adults, haven't had that kind of cultural immersion that I realized later on that I experienced. And so, to just kind of encapsulate what that high school experience did for me, it showed me the segregation. All of my friends, we were very aware that we all lived on certain sides of the city according to what to us seemed as though our race. But at the same time, our friendships provided a bridge to that divide. And that is what most importantly stuck with me and what really allowed me to create the map twin portion of Folded Map. But as I got older in my early 20s, became a new homeowner, moved back to Englewood to become a new homeowner, new wife, new mother. I got to know my neighborhood differently. And that's when I really understood or started to learn the structural, systemic reasons why my neighborhood looked so differently than what I observed in high school compared to its North Side neighborhoods. And it was 2016 presidential election year that I honestly just got pissed off. I I hated the way Chicago was being talked about during that presidential election year. And this conversation seemed to center around gun violence. And I was just completely upset at the fact that there was no larger context provided to educate people. I thought this was a perfect platform to discuss exactly what we're discussing now, systemic racism, segregation, and none of that came out during the presidential election year. And that is the reason that neighborhoods like Englewood in Chicago are struggling with gun violence. And so I was just like, you know what? Everybody in Chicago knows it. We've normalized it to the point where it's a joke, where we refer to, riding on the red line train and seeing the racial difference shift. And I was like, but there's so many other ways to compare and to show this disparity. And it's through those addresses and streets. And so that's when I decided to actively work on creating Folded Map, just to show the world, like, no, the present day impact of decades long of segregation and racist policies is what is shaping our lives today. And I'm going to show you. And that's what really prompted me to start Folded Map.
Well, let's go to some other photographs because they are really striking. I mean, for instance, the one that's on the screen now, 6900 South Ashland, 6900 North Ashland. One of the themes that runs through this is that these parts of the city were built around the same time, in the teens and 20s, and after the 1960s, get on these divergent paths that you described. Talk about this image, and we can go through a few more too, Malvika, if we can. But talk about this image and what's here.
Yeah, well, this image is two intersections. Obviously, the South Ashland is 18 miles from the North Ashland address. And what people can't see from the South Ashland is that it's actually a huge intersection. It includes two major transit lines, it's the Ashland bus, the 69th Street bus, and yet this bus stop that is, used a lot does not even have a bench, let alone a bus shelter. And for all of my life, I definitely don't remember it ever having one. And as a matter of fact, I remember discovering the fact that this bus stop didn't have a bus shelter or bench. It really affected my route to school. I was like, I do not want to get on that bus right there because I'm gonna have to wait in the wintertime. It was just really inconvenient, and it completely changed the routes that I would take to school. Whereas on North Ashland, in the sister neighborhood of Englewood, and I refer to it as sister because we're all in the same city, same street, and those are the neighborhoods that would touch Englewood if you were to fold it at its 0 point, which is downtown. Even though it's a very small residential intersection, at least it has a very cute metal bench. I don't even know if it would need a large bus shelter because of the limited activity on that transit route as opposed to 6900 South Ashland. But at least it's cute, and the South Ashland doesn't even have that, let alone being directly in front of an abandoned building that has a corner store. So those are the kind of differences that I wanted people to really use these photos and this project to be immersed in, is the actual, not only just aesthetic, but difference in the investment of city services. It's on our city and our elected officials to make sure that our bus stops are functional and appropriate for its riders and its residents. And as you can clearly see, the South Ashland definitely looks neglected.
Sure does. Well, let's see some more. And and just to make sure that people are understanding, so Chicago's address system is like this kind of thing that all Chicagoans are proud of. That the baseline for north and south is Madison, and for east and west is State Street, and the blocks and every 8 blocks is a mile. So with that, this is every kid growing up in Chicago, your parent gives you the talk about how you get around the city. That, so 6100 South Walcott is in theory, 61 blocks south of Madison Street, and Walcott, I don't know which Walcott, 1700 west, 1700 west, 17 blocks west of State. And Tonika's right. If you were to fold the map along Madison Street, these things would match like a Rorschach test. But let's talk about this. 2 great houses, actually. I mean, clearly built in the same time frame. And what's going on here? Talk about it.
Yes. So the South Walcott address, as you can see, like you just said, both of these homes are, structurally beautiful. However, you can clearly see the difference in the facade of these homes, and not to say that South Walcott by any means is bad looking, but again, focusing on the environment around it, it is right next door to a vacant lot. And vacant lots, for those who may not know, those get created when a home is demolished as a result of the bank not viewing it as valuable because of no one purchasing it and it just sitting abandoned. So they viewed the land is actually more valuable than just having an abandoned home sit on the lot. So they demolished the house, and those vacant lots actually further diminish the value of the surrounding homes. And so this is literally what so many residents on the south side and west side of Chicago have to deal with, living on blocks that have vacant lots. And this family, when I took the photo of their home, they've been living there for years. And it's actually across the street from another selective enrollment high school called Lindblom. And those students, they are having a similar experience that I did in high school in their commute, but just the opposite effect. And the other interesting thing about the school across the street is that even though it's in Englewood, because it is a selective enrollment school, unfortunately, a lot of the Englewood students population don't test in to this particular school. So it is situated in Englewood. However, they have a very low percentage of students who are actually from Englewood. So all of those things are playing out on this block. And I just thought that was interesting to capture, to share with people how different it is from North Walcott. You don't see a vacant lot on either side of the home that's photographed for North Walcott, and also across the street. It's fully flourishing.
You know, you talk about earlier, you talked about the structural reasons behind this. I mean, just spitballing it, I bet you that house on South Walcott, an appraiser will go by there and probably value it at, I don't know, what would you say, 150, 175?
If that, I would say 90 or 80,
yeah,
maybe even 60.
And the same person would go by this one. I wouldn't even, I don't know, what, 350, 400? I mean, it's been a while since I've been over there.
Definitely over 250,000 for sure.
Exactly. And you've talked about this more recently. You know, these are the structural reasons why. So imagine, let's say the roofs go bad on both these houses in the same year. Who is the bank going to lend the money to, even if that couple on the porch, and they likely do, you know, are credit worthy? I mean, the bank is going to talk about that a bit. These are the sort of structural reasons why we see neighborhoods like this. Mm-hmm.
The structural reasons just deeply impact the value of neighborhoods seen by banks, investors, developers, and ultimately directly contribute to the reason why a neighborhood like Englewood won't increase in value or seen as though it's a neighborhood worth development and investment, because of those exact reasons you mentioned. Basically, the South Walcott, if something happened to their roof, more than likely, they probably won't get the full amount of some kind of renovation loan, which is actually the reason that a lot of people who are interested in moving in Englewood because they have roots there, or they view it as a good investment, they have to go through a separate lending process for renovation, because most of the homes in Englewood that are available and have good bones, they need significant upgrades and renovation. But the problem is the total cost of the renovation, even though that's a separate loan that one would have to qualify for, let's just say if they got it, the investment that they will put into that home in Englewood would essentially be considered over investment. Mm-hmm. Because at that point, now you're putting all this investment in this home to make it livable to your preference, but it's over the value of the rest of the homes in the neighborhood. So if you were going to sell it, then you would have to underprice it for what you've invested it in, because none of the homes can be sold in that neighborhood at the price of what you invested. If it were, 80,000 that you invested for renovation. So now you would say, okay, your home is technically valued at close to 200,000 based off of what you've invested, but you can't sell it for that. Because according to the appraisal regulations, other homes in the neighborhood have to have sold for that amount or more in the past 6 months to a year. And we know that's not happening in Greater Englewood. So that right there is a barrier. How does a neighborhood like Englewood appreciate and value when you have that barrier right there, the appraisal process? Not even going into the lending approval process. A lot of people can't get approved for renovation loans, which is exactly what people in Englewood need if they wanted to become a homeowner.
This is such a good point, and the reason why I wanted us to nest here for a minute is because there is often kind of the easy explanation why neighborhoods look like this, and it tends to be not from us in this cultured crowd here in this conversation, but it's tended to historically be, well, Black folks move in and look what happens. And people don't bother, although I think some of the things that have happened in the wake of George Floyd, and we'll get to this, and your project is making people face this. But you see the kind of barriers. You know, I wrote in Southern Exposure, my book, that there was a Frank Lloyd Wright house in Roseland. And Roseland is a neighborhood very much like Englewood, built around the same time, same kind of things, sort of further south, far south side of the city. House in good condition was for sale of Frank Lloyd Wright house now for $175,000. And they couldn't find a buyer for it for years, well, 3 years at least. They just found a buyer for it within the past month, thank goodness. But this was a house that sat on a quarter of an acre of land by Frank Lloyd Wright, good condition, but it ran against the same issue, Tonika, that you talked about, where they said, well, you know, it's going to need, 30,000, 50,000, whatever, to do what you need to do with it, and the bank won't lend it. So the house just laid there like a egg for years. Let's see a couple more if we can. And I do want to get back to your high school pictures. Don't think I didn't see
that. Oh, goodness. Yes, this is one of my favorites because it's one of the few pictures of the addresses that I allowed for a person to be included in the photo. And to me, it was most meaningful to have that person be a little girl riding her bike. Because this is where she lives. This is the block she lives on. But yet the residents on the South Paulina block have to tolerate and accept the abandoned homes and vacant lots that are across the street from them. This particular block is really a microcosm of the issue in Englewood and Chicago in general. The other side of the street has a lot of homes that are lived in, whereas the side of the street the little girl is riding on has mostly vacant lots and about 3 or 4 homes, 2 of which are abandoned. So this is the kind of living situation that residents on the South Side have to deal with, that literally across the street, they can see the backyard of the other block because there's no homes on the other side of the street. They've all been demolished. And you can easily see the difference because North Carolina, they're proud. They have an American flag, you know, and not only do you see that, you know, all of the homes are lived in, but, you know, even the greenery is different. And I really struggled with if I should include this photo that had the little girl, but I wanted to, as a result of the fact that I wanted people to make the connection that this is what gets normalized as you're a young Black child on the South Side. Even though, you know, clearly she's having a wonderful time riding her bike, she's getting used to the fact that vacant lots and abandoned buildings are part of her everyday experience on this block. Whereas if you were living on North Paulina, or a little girl riding your bike on North Paulina, you wouldn't have that experience. And so this to me embodies the two sides of the same city that we all refer to when talking about Chicago's segregation, how it really does shape your lived experience in unconscious ways.
Now let's see if we can go to the images that you took of Englewood people, if we can, because you know, that's the thing. I mean, there is this every 10 years or so, it seems like there's a new neighborhood that becomes, I mean, not a new neighborhood, but there comes a neighborhood that becomes emblematic of Chicago's problems, if you will, particularly a Black neighborhood. So when I was coming up in high school, it was Woodlawn, right? I mean, Woodlawn, yes. That was the thing. And, and you could go any place in America and someone know what Woodlawn was. And now, and then it was Cabrini Green in the 90s. And now it seems to be Englewood. And you find, because it's there, you find beauty, you find humanity, you find life, you find joy. I mean, people from the outside may look at these neighborhoods and just think that we're all just hiding under couches and ducking bullets. but you find the life there. This is the one I want. Talk about this and a few more. It's a beautiful house, by the way, too. Look at that door. Look at those bricks.
Oh, yes. And this is actually next door to Englewood. This is Auburn Gresham, but the woman that's pictured here, she has connections to Englewood, and I was telling her just about my photo documentation, and she always came to this block to visit, so I did include it. But these are the kind of images that prior to working on and doing Folded Map that I just did. I documented not only Greater Englewood, but its surrounding neighborhoods, because me being an insider and a photographer, I'm able to bypass what most outsiders might pay attention to, which is the disinvestment, the disparity. And I'm not saying that that's wrong to notice that, but it's important to recognize how what you're exposed to or what you're told about a community really does impact what you pay attention to. And I think photography is such a wonderful medium to demonstrate that, how you can have so many people photograph the same block or the same moment and pay attention to several different images and have different compositions. And so I really wanted to share my documentation of Black communities on the South Side, focusing on Greater Englewood, to show that we are art. We can be photographed as art. We have love and happiness, and it's actually ridiculous for one to question if that even exists. And more importantly, I really wanted people to use my photography of Greater Englewood to begin to question, why haven't you seen images like this? And as much as I would love, all the props in the world for, my photography, it was really just the collection of my work that I wanted to challenge people on why they haven't seen images like this. And it's not because, oh, I'm so special as a photographer and I'm hunting down happy moments. No, this is something that is of abundance in neighborhoods, in all neighborhoods, but there's a reason we don't see it. And that is the conceptual systemic issue within media and otherwise, that I wanted people to use these photos of everyday life in Englewood to begin to think about, and for them to wonder, how is the larger medium and images that they see of Black neighborhoods really shaping their opinions of it when they don't really have a concrete reference?
Oh, well, you know what? We could talk 2 hours about that alone, because you're absolutely right. With Southern exposure, I wanted people to be mad. I wanted people to be mad that they hadn't seen this before. And I want people to understand that I'm not just cherry picking buildings, right? Going to the one block or the one house on the block, that I could fall down on the South Side, hit the shutter by accident, and pick up 12 of these buildings if if it came down to it. That is that plentiful. But okay, but let's go to this. What is Little League, I guess, or what's going on?
So this is the Englewood Little League, and this was a game that they had outside of Englewood, but all of them are on the team from Englewood. And I photographed this because obviously, one, this is the beginning of a game and they were preparing to pay homage to so much, not only the Star Spangled Banner, but this is also challenging the notion of what people think about young Black boys. And especially the fact that they are from Englewood. And I wanted people to have this alternative perception or image of young Black boys being young Black boys, like to actually think, and a lot of people do, that young Black boys from neighborhoods like Greater Englewood, they view them as victims or problematic or potential future gang members. When in actuality, majority of young Black boys from neighborhoods like Englewood, boys like this.
Mhm. Mhm.
playing a sport, extracurricular activities, in need of extracurricular activities.
This could be a 2-hour conversation in and of itself. Can you imagine, the sacrifice, of time and whatever it may be for these young brothers to be in this position? Well, I'm not talking about they had to, fight street gangs to be this, but just any parent who's ever put their kid in extracurricular activities, it's an investment, right?
Yeah.
And that these young brothers get to take advantage of that and be a part of that is a beautiful thing. Let's go to a couple more. Yes. Talk about this.
Well, this one, I must admit, includes my daughter. My daughter is
Really?
the one that has the checkered shirt wrapped around her waist.
Mhm.
And the reason I had included this in the Everyday Englewood series is, for one, my daughter obviously is from Englewood, lives in Englewood, and her best friend also lives in Englewood. And this was, they wanted a photo shoot for their 8th grade graduation. And once I started thinking about the desires of these two little girls to be captured their 8th grade grammar school year, um, I, I really wanted to include this photo because it is universal. That's a celebratory moment for for all, and for whatever reason that we can all imagine, um, a lot of people don't think this kind of desire or even happiness exists in neighborhoods like Englewood. Like, two little Black girls from Greater Englewood can't want a photo shoot for their 8th grade graduation. Something so universal, so simple. Um, People wouldn't think that that can actually be facilitated in Greater Englewood. And so they were just really proud to be able to take this photo in front of this mural that they liked. And I thought it really does amplify, images that we don't see of young Black girls from the South Side, or on the South Side. We usually see them through the lens of victimhood, or pain, or poverty. And there's also another side to that. We're not monolithic, even though we're all from the same neighborhood. And I think that's something that we struggle with as Black people in Chicago, not trying to convince, but trying to get the world in our city to see that we are diverse even within our own race. And it is unfair to categorize us all, one, so negatively, but also to minimize the full breadth of life for everyone that exists in neighborhoods like Englewood. And so I just thought this was an embodiment of that.
That's so true. And just for a housekeeping point, we're going to get to Q&A. I guess probably in another 20 minutes or less. I really want to get you guys rolling in on this. But here's the question I was going to ask later. And I do want to ask you about the exhibition, and the exhibition being at Loyola University Museum and the shine that it's getting. And I was going to ask this question later, but given that we're kind of at the doorstep of it now, I want to ask this. And I promised I was going to try to find an elegant way to ask it when we talked about it. I don't know if I can. So let me just roll it out. And my heart is in the right place. It becomes all clumsy. But how important is it? Describe the importance of a Black woman taking on and doing this kind of work. Um, and just,
Yeah.
whatever way it comes out, I just want to be able to
Yeah.
mark. But go ahead.
Well, I think, it's not lost on us that, within the industry of photography, in whatever facet, documentary, journalism, you know, your your profession of it, all of it, the dominant population is white males. I mean, that's what it is, and that's what's reflected in a lot of other industries and sectors. And so not only are they the dominant population in photography that gets recognition, that gets opportunities, but as a result, they have shaped ultimately our world through our worldview through photography of how we view other places and people. And not to minimize their perspective, but to also bring awareness to the fact that so many other perspectives are left out. And oftentimes than not, Black women's perspective is traditionally, historically left out and removed. There isn't a huge percentage of Black female photographers. And so for me, I can just think back to college and high school, and I understand why there isn't. There's a lot of barriers along the way, not only systemically, but personally. When I started doing photography in high school, I was told that, oh, I should consider photojournalism. It was never kind of expressed to me that it could be art, that I should consider fine art. So I went the route of photojournalism. And during college, I had an amazing internship at a wonderful investigative monthly in Chicago called The Chicago Reporter that focuses on race. And I learned about photojournalism. And then I quickly realized that, if I wanted to become a staffed photojournalist in the early 2000s, the reality was I was more than likely going to have to photograph my neighborhood and the crimes, because that is what a lot of freelance photographers get sent to communities of color to photograph or document. And I didn't want to do that. I was like, I don't want to spend the first, years of my profession as a staff photographer getting sent to communities of color to document pain. Like, that just did not sit right with me. So even decisions, personal reasons like that contributes to why you don't see a lot of Black women in these fields, as well as an array of other reasons, structural and systemic. And so I think that's why I appreciate the support and amplification of my work by Chicago, because I think we recognize that historically we haven't seen images of Chicago through the lens of a Black woman.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, speaking of amplification, then let's okay, all right. Now you got to talk about this. Look at this. Now y'all don't know, or do you know? I mean, the Crown Royal bag is like that is like the thing, right? I mean, that is like, when but talk about this image, talk about this beautiful woman and the Crown Royal bag and whatever bags and whatever else.
Yes. This is quintessential Black American culture. The attachment we have culturally to certain brands, Crown Royal being one of them, Pepsi another. This to me fully embodied the location I was at. I was at what you would call a lounge, but definitely a lounge that decades before totally functioned as a juke joint. Okay. And the people who frequent this lounge are probably the people who actually went to this place when it was a juke joint. So the whole crowd is older Black people. And you literally walk into a time warp when you go into this lounge, because you have patrons who are just like this woman here. They're older, they're fancy. I mean, she got on her fur coat and she was just listening to her music, and all of them in there are just like this, and they represent a population and a history of Black neighborhoods that should be uplifted, documented, and preserved, but they are literally still functioning as if it's the 1960s and 50s. Like, you hear the music that they like, it is not any contemporary music that was being played. Clearly you see that they still drinking Crown Royal. It was, it's just, it's a beautiful spot. And a lot of the lounges on Chicago's South Side have such deep history, and also the people who frequent those places. And so there was no way that I could do any photography of Englewood and not include one of its, most popular older lounges.
There's so much to be said here. This is a 2-hour conversation. I mean, first of all, the Crown Royal bag is literally royalty in working class Black household, because this is where you saved your pennies. This is where the odds and ends went. This was like a de facto purse or wallet. And it's kind of velvety, so it was kind of cool to have. And of course, the Crown Royal, the liquor went inside the bag, and you drink the liquor up and you keep the bag. But the other thing about this, which is interesting, is that these are safe spaces for Black folk. And over time, over the span of history, this is where, we when we tell, not we, but when it is told by others, the history of Black Chicago and Black America, it gets told in these safe and sane and sanitized ways. What we overlook, and I'm glad you're documenting this, and we'll do more hopefully, is that not only were they safe spaces for Black people, this is where the political deals could be cut, the first level here, right? This is where organizing could be done. We think about it, the church as being the only place, and the this and the that, but the tavern, the nightclub, the lounge, these played an important role in the development of Black Chicago.
Definitely an extension of where organizing occurs, because all of the people who were working to organize politically and just regular residents, they all wanted a drink after, they did organize in a church. And a lot of them will go here. Aldermen historically have gone to lounges, and, this is where the organizing continued in those spaces that you're referring to.
Exactly. Well, now let me jump to the amplification point that you made earlier. One way your work was amplified in a really magnificent way was the Loyola University Museum show. And for those of you who are not from Chicago, Loyola University Museum is in Streeterville. It's right across from the old water, right? Tower. So it's like Chicago Avenue in Michigan. It's like a couple of blocks from the John Hancock building, a couple of blocks from Water Tower Shopping Center. These images are in, if you will, they're in the whitest of Chicago, the most upscale portion of Chicago.
Magnificent Mile, yes.
Magnificent Mile. Talk about how it got there and what the response was.
Oh my gosh. First of all, how it got there, I love telling this story, and I'll try to, summarize it quickly. But it reveals the importance of connections and people sharing information and talking, and really people understanding that, obviously we are not in the place where we want to be as a country, as a world, racially, and laws and policies haven't gotten us there. They've helped us get a little bit closer, but they haven't gotten us there. And the reason is because it has to be personal. You have to build relationships across racial lines, class lines, all of those things. And the reason that Folded Map was even exhibited at Loyola University Museum of Art is because of connections that were made like that. Sharing my work on social media, at this point in 2017, I had started to share some of Folded Map's address pairs online. And it was a group of students from Loyola who were taking a psychology of creativity class. And I think it was late 2016, they told me that they were going to be doing some work for this class, and they wanted to interview me. And I said, sure, because I love talking to students. And they said they found my work online, and they wanted to talk about Englewood in a way that it hasn't been shared in their classes previously before. And so I just thought that was really smart. I respected that. And they wanted to know if they could purchase some photos so that they can, show for their class. And I was like, oh, they are, some A+ students. So, I gave them a little deal, a package of 10, and they shared it in class. And it just so happens that two things: the professor that they did this presentation to contacted the curator at Loyola University Museum of Art and said, my students brought in some photography by a local artist that I just wanted to know if you know about, or if you don't, you should. And the curator at the time was Natasha Ritzma. And in the same class was the curatorial intern for the museum. She was in the class, a student, and she told the curator, Natasha Ritzma, the same thing. And then Natasha Ritzma contacted me a few months later and said that, she checked out my work. She would like to offer me an exhibition at Loyola, and it was the Everyday Englewood exhibition. And that was, even though it was in the museum, it was in the hallway, my little introductory exhibition. And then she started to ask me about, other projects I'm working on. And I told her Folded Map. And she said, we want to exhibit that. And I was like, this is 2017. I was literally still working on it. I was like, it's not finished yet. It's probably going to take another 9 to 10 months at the rate that it's going. She said, I don't care. We will help you finish it if we need to, but I want that to be exhibited here. She referenced the location, which of course I, adored. I was like, yes, it's central. It's a central location to Chicago, to both of the neighborhoods. And I am comparing, this would be a great location. And she just continued to stay in correspondence with me and help me actually complete the project. So that is how Folded Map ended up having an exhibition at Loyola University Museum of Art. It was really because of those curious students who were disrupting segregation, the how it impacts their social networks. They did more than what they should have to go beyond their social network to really get a voice of someone from the community that they had a school assignment on. And if that connection had not been made at that time, I can't truly say if Folded Map would have been exhibited at Loyola.
Well, so we're just about a couple of minutes away or less from opening the floor up to questions. Gosh, there's so many places I want to go, but very quickly,
yes,
talk about this image here. Where is it, and who are these two people, Nanette and Wade?
Yes. So Nanette is Englewood resident and Wade is Edgewater resident. These were my first map twins. These are the first people that I was testing out the concept of map twins on. Their exact home addresses don't twin, but they were the representation of the neighborhoods that if you were to fold Chicago's map would touch each other. So this is literally Edgewater and Englewood together, represented through them being on Wade's porch on the north side. And this is a photo of Nanette obviously feeling very comfortable on his porch on the north side. She got real comfortable real quick. And that was partly due to Wade and his wife, Jennifer, extending that comfort, but also her appreciating how beautiful it was. So that is who they are. They're the first map twins. They're the ones who have known each other the longest through this project, 3 years, and they are still in contact. I mean, at this point, they're friends. They're very close friends. They recently just started an extension of Folded Map. During the pandemic, they told me, we want to do block twins. Is that okay? I was like, oh my God, yeah, do what you want. And they basically introduced their neighbors to each other, the neighbors on their block during the pandemic, to do a beautification and gardening project on Nanette's block in Englewood. And that just happened. So that is who this is a photo of.
Incredible. And one more, Maurice, John, and Paula.
Yes. So, we don't have to, this is one of those comparisons where I'm like, look, we could joke about stereotypes here because they are as different as they look. Like you can't, they are. You have a older Jewish couple and a young Black man from Englewood. Like this, they are very different. However, they still keep in touch. And so this map twin is really interesting because they text each other. Maurice does a lot of community work in Englewood, and he's invited John and Paula to all of them. John came to Englewood's first critical mass bike ride because he was invited by Maurice. And as a result, John had the best tour of Englewood at night that you could ever get. And also Maurice took John and Paula on a tour of his neighborhood outside of Folded Map. They told me they were meeting and I was like, oh, okay. The project's over. You don't have to do it, but they did. And to me, it just goes to show, which is why I love the portraits of them, that, you're probably looking at them thinking whatever, projecting onto them, whatever stereotype that you can conjure up. But through it all, all of them wanted to participate in this project because they share that interest and that passion to address systemic racism and segregation. So regardless of how different they are, they still had that in common. And so I definitely love that map twin.
Really quickly, do you, and I'm saying this to myself, not to you, do you feel that there's kind of a moment now? I felt it a little bit and then a lot with Southern exposure after the George Floyd incident, and then all the civil unrest and questioning that people were doing. Black folk especially, we've been wrestling with these issues, but also others as well, that there's something in the air, something that is making these kind of projects not giving them validity because they have validity built in, but somehow it seems like people's ears are open, the scales are off the eyes a bit. Talk about that, or do you think that's
I definitely agree. I think this pandemic, the uprisings, if you will, it being a presidential election year, us not having the distractions of entertainment, sports, celebrities, it is really forcing us as a country, as a world, to pay attention to issues that have been long-standing. And people are, I believe, and I choose to believe, are realizing that we can't change these systemic issues without making it personal, without changing our ways of viewing things, without really connecting to people, because we really not have had a moment in our country's history where that was allowed to happen like it can happen now. And this is just not only just on social media, but the type of help that you can lend your distant neighbor or your fellow citizen. People are recognizing that all of us are segregated. When people think about segregation, they tend to think of communities of color as segregated, but no, predominantly white neighborhoods are segregated. And I think now there is an awakening of how people can begin to tackle this on a more intimate level than thinking they can or should only vote their way out of our country struggling with this. Like, there's other things that we can do that can really help transform our country and get it to where we want to be. And it is relationships. It's relationships. It's recognizing that your life, regardless if you're white or Black, has been shaped by our country's history of racism and segregation. And it has been projected onto us. And I think now we're getting to the point where people are accepting that as a fact. And now they're wondering, what can they do? And I think projects like yours, like mine, is really showing people of a world that they have not been told about. And then also for them to question, why haven't I been educated about this? And that also leads to the systemic part of it as well. So I do agree. And I definitely tend to capitalize off of this moment of hope that we all have, even though we're going through the devastation of 2020. It is bringing us together, I believe. And I'm going to continue to do projects that uplift our effort to understand.
Now, last question for me, at least for a bit, and then we'll get into the Q&A from the crowd. You mentioned the word capitalize. Listen, I'm going to tell you something I've never said. When I was putting together Southern Exposure, I only photographed one building in Englewood, one, because I knew you were there. And we hadn't met yet, right? But the honest to God truth. So Englewood people come in my talks and say, how come you only put one Englewood building in there? And I don't want to tell you, because Tonika was there, and I don't want to be accused of stepping on her thing. But I was,
No.
but that's the God's honest truth. I've never admitted that. And this is
Oh.
Yale Apartments at 65th and Yale, beautiful
Oh
apartment building,
gosh, yes.
98. Was when I was architecture critic in the 90s. It had been abandoned. I think probably 15 years before that. The Department of Housing, the developer, the city gets together, I guess around 99, 2000. They put together the cash to bring this building back. It's a beautiful building, and it's one of those great buildings with the court space on the inside. So you've all seen the thriller where the guy's in the elevator and he's going up, and you can see every floor as he rises. It's that kind of atrium type building there. But I had to put that in the book, but only put one. But I say that
you got to come back and do more, because I am not the kind of photographer you are. I know some buildings are beautiful, but I don't know. I don't know all the history behind it. So you have to come. And
well, if I do a part 2, then I'll put it in there. But I certainly wasn't gonna do that right now. But I say that as a setup for this question. You mentioned the word capitalize a few minutes ago. There was a moment a few weeks ago, right, where the New York Times, and there's no other way to say this, they essentially lifted your idea, and it found its way into the newspaper. And talk about that a bit, and also to explain, to understand that for others is that they specifically picked 2 areas of the city. I mean, you could do this in theory, some parts of the West Side and the Southwest Side, or other, but they specifically picked a vineyard that you're in. Talk about that, how you felt, and how ultimately it was, I guess, resolved.
Yes. So yeah, New York Times and their Great Divide photo essay. That was, I think, September 5th that they dropped it online. And I immediately started getting notifications on social media from friends, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, that tagged me, and they were like, is this your project? I'm so confused. Like, who did you consult them? Or, this is wrong. I totally thought this was going to be about your project. So I looked at it, and yes, I got mad. I instantly got upset, because I knew that the concept, let alone the actual location, Englewood, that was my project. Now, they chose a different neighborhood to compare it, Englewood to, Streeterville. I focused on the actual numeric map twins of Englewood. But either way, the concept of photographically showing the disparity between 2 neighborhoods that have racial and economic difference, that is my contribution to this larger canon of understanding segregation and documenting it. And so I was well aware of that being my contribution, and I was proud of it. I was happy that I was able to create a project that could show people visually the present day impact of something that we're hopefully exposed to in regards to segregation. And so when I saw this, I was like, I know they didn't. That's my project. So I immediately, posted something on Twitter that went a little viral. I said, I hope New York Times don't think they came up with this idea, because if they do, then that is ultimately poor journalism. And that's what I view New York Times as. Even though it was in the opinion section and a photo essay, this is still like New York Times, the pinnacle of journalism and information to the world. And I was just insulted on multiple levels. One, as a Black woman photographer who dedicated years to creating this way, a new visual way of examining segregation. And then also just as a Chicagoan, I said, how is, this larger market of New York going to just do a poor copy of my project on an issue that is so critical to Chicagoans in such a very, limited way? They didn't offer any new insight. they actually photographed both of these neighborhoods very poorly. And when I say poor, I meant so far as depth, content, connectivity. And they didn't offer any new information to its readers about this issue of segregation. And they were using a report that Chicagoans definitely knew about a year ago when it was published. So I really didn't understand how they were making it relevant to now. So that's when I just thought it was very difficult for me to believe that they didn't know about my project, because even just how they're presenting it is exactly how it is on my website. And so it also brought up a lot of conversation within the documentary photography world and journalism world about ownership. And a lot of people are uninformed about how you can protect concept and art. They told me that I was wrong. You can't do that. And I'm like, actually, you can. You can trademark a lot of things for educational purposes. You can like protect a concept. But more important than that, it also revealed to me the larger issue of, once again, ownership. How this kind of theft or omission of recognition to people who have done similar work or more extensive work on an issue is prevalent in our country in regards to the intellectual artistic property of Black artists and creatives. And so I just found myself in another situation dealing with ownership, which is ultimately what is at the core of Folded Map. And yeah, it definitely upset me. It was somewhat resolved. My fellow Chicagoans, they definitely weren't having it. They wrote all kind of letters and emails to New York Times. They was ready to fight online and argue with anyone who dared to say that this isn't my project. And it was because of their support, mobilizing on social media, that New York Times added an editor's note that said, oh, Tonika Johnson, Folded Map Project, also covers race and segregation in Chicago. We didn't know about this project until after the publication of this piece. So that right there also reveals the ethical issue of New York Times journalism practices. I don't know how you would not do cursory research to discover a project so similar to the one that you want to do. It just doesn't make sense. And so Alec Soth, the commissioned photographer for this piece, reached out to me after I also made a post on Instagram, ultimately apologizing. He said that he did not know about my work, that he just accepted the commission. He said he had some reservations about this project, but they were unfounded to him, so he just went ahead and did it. And he donated the earnings from this commission to Folded Map, which was $1,500, and he apologized. However, I do know that he has issue with the 2 articles that were written about this debacle. He definitely has reached out to the reporters of those articles and said that he didn't like being slandered. So I do know that is still going on. And I did talk to my trademark lawyer, and she said, no, I definitely do have a case if I want to pursue litigation against New York Times. So all of that is a snowball of kind of everything that we were talking about with, Black women photographers, the photography industry, how the journalism industry or the media outlets, how they control the narrative of how certain communities, cities are viewed, and also how their internal practices aren't as ethical or equitable as they should be. And so that is what this incident was for me. And I'm still, annoyed by it, but I want to use it as a teachable moment for fellow artists to understand the issues, the systemic issues going on in our respective industries, as well as ownership. Art as a medium to help people understand complex issues is powerful, and it should and it can be protected. And unfortunately, like I mentioned before, this country has a deep history of legalizing the theft of Black intellectual property.
And we're going to go to the crowd for questions. You know what galled, and I haven't said this to you, but one of the things that galled me about this, in addition to everything you just said, was that it was a bit of a lie, if I can say this without running into things, that to compare Streeterville with almost any neighborhood in Chicago, you find disparity. Streeterville is like Manhattan, in many respects, or some parts of, I don't know if there's an LA component to it. I don't know LA as well enough, but it's the richest neighborhood in the city. I mean, and I think,
and it's not really residential. It just became residential. So the comparison doesn't even make real sense other than that report.
Exactly. Doesn't make sense at all. I spent 12 years in Beverly. I mean, if you compare, and Beverly is as middle class as you can get. If you compare Streeterville to Beverly, you'd find disparities. So
Yes.
compared to Englewood was a bit low down, but that's just me. So let's go. And I don't know how you want to do this, Malvika, but let's go to the audience for questions.
All right. I just want to say thank you both so much. I feel like this is a flex that I even know the two of you. I feel like that's the whole point. Like, do you see these brilliant people?
Oh, you're so sweet. I'm so happy to know you too, Malvika.
Same.
But this has been incredible. You see what I'm saying, dear audience? Like, Lee Bey is the kind of man who knows the interior of an architectural space that's been locked off for years. Tonika Johnson can speak brilliantly about basically any topic on visual language and media. So there's my hype. We have a bunch of audience questions lined up. So the first will come from our very own Betsy Rubin.
Oh, I know Betsy.
I know Betsy too. Hey. Betsy, you should be able to turn on your microphone now.
Thank you. This is an amazing conversation. In the news lately, we heard that some developers are buying up a bunch of buildings on the south side, and I'm wondering what you think about that, and what you think their plans are, and how this will affect people in the community.
Yeah, well, of course, I'm suspicious of it all. I don't know the intentions of some developers who could be buying up a lot of land. I know that some of my fellow neighbors who have who are more knowledgeable about real estate have details about the possibility of what that could become. But it all depends on the intention of the developer. If it is a developer who is going to actually build affordable housing specifically for residents in the community, and inviting others from outside the community, then I would say that's needed. That's great, because that's the only way some of these neighborhoods can get transformed, unless there is a large development where homes are sold at a higher value than the homes that exist in these neighborhoods, so that the neighborhood could appreciate in economic value. That is unfortunately the only way something like that can happen. So I would definitely want to be able to have access to the intentions of developers, and would hope that would be the goal. But yeah, it's all suspicious, especially in a neighborhood like Greater Englewood. Once you hear things like that, then it makes you think about the history of the neighborhood. Like, oh, was this the goal all along? To beat down a neighborhood so bad and make it so undesirable that it could be used for profit for other people who don't live here. So, it's unfortunately something that we have to see how it plays out. But the people who are really passionate about housing reform and accessible housing for all, I'm just hoping that their expertise will guide us in a way that we're all more informed about what's going on, because I personally don't know. I'm just a suspicious resident. Thank you for the question, Betsy.
Thank you, Betsy. Our next question, I think, might build upon this question and comes from the lovely Anya. Anya, you should be able. Perfect.
Hi. So yeah, this is a question about gentrification, so related. Just wondering, I mean, we're speaking about these potential developments, and I'm wondering how you've observed or even documented how recent gentrification has changed the landscape of Chicago, and more specifically the South Side, if it has. And I'm interested in how such a starkly segregated city, how the gentrification functions, like in comparison to somewhere like New York City. And also, sorry, this is a multi-part question, but with that, how do you feel about kind of the ethics of gentrification? Because we just spoke about developers, and it's hard to trust, the
intentions,
why they would want to buy this land. But thinking about the people who might move in, how can they enter, if they can enter ethically and cohesively, and is there a way that you're seeing that happen right now?
Yeah, I definitely welcome Lee to share his insight, because I have I don't think it's unique perspective on it, but I'm all for unity and those who are striving for a more equitable world for everyone to come together and work together. So how I view gentrification in general is, the ultimate issue is with gentrification is the fact that there is a specific population in Chicago, usually young white professionals, that wherever they move, because they move where they can afford, like all people, services and resources follow them, development follows them. That isn't something that they can control, that specific population. But it has happened enough for that population and others to know that's what happens. Wherever they move, everything that population wants starts to appear, which ultimately changes the whole feel and makeup of the neighborhood that they moved in. And I like to remind people that even though we have a problem with gentrifiers, let's redirect that frustration, because it isn't their fault that they are viewed as like the optimal consumer to developers and businesses. We need to redirect that frustration to our elected officials. Resources and money and investment in a neighborhood shouldn't come just because one specific population moves in. And so the people who are interested in moving into neighborhoods that they feel they are gentrifying, they need to come there with the intention to be an ally to the residents that live there. Not come there and act like, oh, you discovered this cool neighborhood that you can afford. No, recognize that people live there and you need to work with them to protect them being able to stay. And if we can unite and fight towards that equitable solution, I think it would prevent us from going in circles talking about, oh, the gentrifiers and, oh, the residents who live there. Like, let's come together to, hold our elected officials accountable and say that investment should come to these neighborhoods prior to the population that investment typically follows. So that is my opinion. Not unfortunately, but in Chicago, and Lee, maybe you can attest to this, that it's predominantly Latino neighborhoods that get gentrified. Even in the case of Bronzeville, that neighborhood, which is predominantly Black, was quote unquote gentrified by middle-class Black people, but yet their income has not even warranted the investment that would happen if they were white. Bronzeville has so many middle-class Black professionals that have been living in that neighborhood that have actually, because of them, been able to preserve a lot of the historic architecture there, but they don't even have, they just got a grocery store. investment isn't following them when their income is deserving of it. So, you know, it still comes down to race, unfortunately. And we can't, as residents, fight that like amongst each other. We have to come together and hold our elected officials accountable.
Tanika's right. I mean, two pieces to it. One is that those who come don't act like colonizers, but do work with the individuals who are there. Two is, Chicago has been a weird thing when it comes to gentrification, in that typically, to put it plainly, white people don't want to live around Black folks in Chicago. So what has happened over the past 50 years, although we don't see it as gentrification, we see it as something else. What happens is that a neighborhood has to bottom out and be hollowed out, and then the Black population is pushed out and then replaced by a white population. So an example is the near South Side, the sort of interstitial space between the north edge of Bronzeville and the south edge of downtown. Places along Michigan Avenue, Roosevelt Road in Michigan, between 18th Street. This was a Black entertainment area when I was in my 20s. I'm 55 now, but when I was in my 20s and 30s, I mean, this area was Black. And what happened is that little by little, one by one, these places are moved out. And now if you go through the South Loop, I mean, house music was incubated in the South Loop. That's how Black it was, right? And how diverse it was, because our gay brothers and sisters were there too, with our Black brothers and sisters all making this music. And you would never know it was there. You can look back and see the development of old Michael Reese Hospital, of the Illinois Institute of Technology, that the city kind of carved out a moat around downtown where Black folks lived, evacuated them to points elsewhere, and then spent the next 20 years rebuilding. So the thing about the mass buying of the apartment buildings, it gives you pause, because you think, well, is this the 21st century version of that? If you buy enough of these buildings, you can replace the population overnight. Or is it what Tonika mentioned, what it ought to be, is a way to get new owners to put the housing in those communities, affordable rental, that in many of those places are so desperately needed.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. We have had some really incredible questions come in, so I just want to give some shout outs to Chris Neurotter, Maureen Reedon, Audrey Henderson, a couple more people. Unfortunately, time waits for no Zoom, and I know Lee has another meeting lined up.
I got another 15 minutes. I borrowed another.
Oh, okay.
Really?
Yeah, that's why I was looking down. I was typing a message to my next meeting, so I got another.
Do you see how I strong-armed you on the public venue? All right, perfect. I would love actually to go to, let's see. Okay, well, I have a question. I'm gonna rephrase a question now that we're here talking about gentrification. We had a question come in from the audience early on, which I'll just read. It's, is Theaster Gates or other artists like Theaster Gates involved as a mentor in the restoration neighborhood project you're thinking of? And that brings up a lot of feelings for me, right? How do we talk about restoration in individualized communities across, what is the model for sustainable restorations? I was wondering, I know this is a spicy question, but if you could speak to that, is Theaster Gates involved in the restoration of Englewood? And would you invite Theaster Gates, for instance, to help revitalize a neighborhood, or what is the alternative model to doing that?
Well, he isn't involved in the restoration of Greater Englewood. The neighborhood that he is helping to restore is directly linked to his relationship with the University of Chicago. So Englewood is a little too far west for that to be a geographic focus for him. And, I think what he has done has served as a good model or case study as to an artist, using space, not only race within their artistic practice, but transferring that into actual restoration or contribution to a neighborhood being invested in. But I wouldn't say that in Greater Englewood, we would need a theaster because there's so many committed residents, myself included, who are already working towards very clear intentional projects that could lead to larger community investment. RAGE, Resident Association of Greater Englewood, Iman, Teamwork Englewood, they're actually working on a project called Go Green on Racine that if this is funded and completed, it could transform the possibilities of what Greater Englewood could be. And that is ultimately a project where they're coming together to repurpose a closed school. And we have 18 of them in Greater Englewood. So if this project were to move forward to completion, it really could offer an opportunity for others to invest and begin repurposing other schools that could then begin to increase the value of the neighborhoods and homes around it. So we already have projects, restoration projects in place in Englewood that just need financial support and obviously support from our city, which is what they're working through. So I don't think we need an artist like Theaster to lead this work in Greater Englewood, because that's already happening. And then I also, through the work that I'm doing, I'm starting to develop interest in, land ownership. And I definitely have a goal of, purchasing or helping one of the land sale contract homes in Greater Englewood become a landmark and hopefully being renovated into a gallery or permanent museum space where all of these things that we've discussed can be housed and shared with the public. So we have, more than enough individuals in Greater Englewood who have amazing ideas and doing actual work for the restoration of Englewood. So I don't know if I answered that or not.
No, I think you did. I mean, there needs to be, Theaster is a player, right, in this kind of venue, but not the player. My issue, I mean, and he's done great work, but with the Englewoods, the Roselands, the the Garfield Parks of Chicago, what they need is development that brings other development. And I don't mean that, necessarily in a mercenary way where, you need developers after developers, but it needs something that sparks other things. I mean, one thing that concerns me about the Theaster's work, as good as it is that, it's dependent on a sugar daddy or mama, right? The University of Chicago in one case, and foundations in the other. And as their interests wane, in the future, which they all do, foundations look at one thing this year and look at something else 5 years from now. I wonder about the sustainability of some of these projects. I'm also concerned that, for instance, the Arts Bank, which I think is beautiful, it's actually in the neighborhood that I was born in, that it's created no economic bounce at all, even though it's surrounded by vacant lots. So no one's ever said, well, gee, I'm gonna put my coffee shop there. I'm gonna put my restaurant there. Nothing. So, and so those are the things that I think, I mean, they're interesting projects. They bring some attention. They do good things, but I think so far they've been limited in their impact.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm gonna get hate mail off that, right? But it's
I support you.
I had to ask the question because I think Lee, like, you're one of the few people I know who'll speak honestly about like what is and is not sustainable in terms of these kinds of projects, right?
Mm-hmm. And sustainability is everything. That's the thing. Give me something in my neighborhood that's going to be here. I mean, that's and spark other things that are going to be here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we have time for two quick final questions. The last one I want to ask to both of you, but to Tonika specifically. So much of your project has to do with like crossing neighborhood boundaries, entering into spaces where you might not have been originally. And I guess I'm wondering, like, in a COVID moment when, social activity is not really the done thing, right? What if you can't get a friend from that neighborhood to invite you over for dinner or for a barbecue or for a party or something? Like, how do we do the work of becoming familiar with neighborhoods different from our own. Like, and how, I know this is specific to Chicago, but I feel like there's something here, right, that like we could all take home.
Yeah. I'm glad you asked that question because my folded map family, Dr. Maria Creason is actually here. Her and I have been working on what is available now, which is the folded map action kit. And it was born out of that exact question. There were so many people who were interested in folded map and wanting to be a map twin and wanting to learn more and like enter equitably into a neighborhood if they don't have a friend, because that's just what Chicago has, this is the situation that they have put residents in. And so the folded map action kit, which is available on the website for download, right here, right there, you can print it out. It is a list of errands that I'm inviting people to run in their map twin neighborhood. And, you know, hopefully doing these errands, you'll be able to experience as close as possible what your neighborhood, what your distant neighbors' daily life is like. So errands such as go buy an organic apple, go buy lotion, because rightly that's different in Black neighborhoods. Go to a local library, go take out $20 from an ATM. So I think that is a good way to make this effort more personal while also being educational, because it allows you, or it puts you in places where other residents are. So you're going to meet just regular residents doing regular things that, regardless of what the perception of a neighborhood is, everyone has to go to the grocery store, everyone has to access banks, everyone has to use some city service. And for people to understand the difference of those experiences is really critical to how people will figure out how they want to contribute personally to helping like dismantle these walls that that divide us. And so, you know, we also offer people an opportunity to share back those experiences. So that's also an extension of Folded Map. My goal and hope is that people who participate in the action kit share back their experience. And that's also a collection of information that we can share with the larger public to serve as not only information, but hope. You know, like there's people who really want to help and legit don't know how. And, you know, they want to enter into a neighborhood to experience this disparity or the over-resourced aspect of other neighborhoods, so that it can inform what they want to fight about, basically how they want to be an ally. So that's one way that I would suggest as it relates to Folded Map to kind of further your education and personal understanding of these issues, and then also share back. But the action kit, even though it's specific to Chicago and helping people kind of conceptually understand what their map twin neighborhood is, it's something that's universal. It can be applied to any other location that has segregation. You all might not have a grid map like Chicago, but there is always a divide if there is segregation. There's either a house, a park, a street, something that divides. There's always a fold, and people can use this action kit to just become more informed personally.
You're so true, so true. I mean, the idea that, you know, don't come in like a colonizer, come in looking, you know, to you know, the right way, I mean, this isn't the zoo. I mean, one of the things that I had to struggle with in writing a Southern Exposure is to make sure that the gaze of the book was adjusted. So it's not like saying, hey, hipsters, here are some cool houses to look at that I bet you've never seen, but really to put in what Tonika puts in her work, which is the history, the context, everything. So, you know, as you know, the young folks say, you know, so you may have to come to these neighborhoods, but I mean, but to come to these neighborhoods, you're going to have to learn something today, right? You're going to have to, you know, you just can't come and look and ooh and ah and get back. You need to, this needs to cut a little bit. This needs to, you know, metaphorically, you need to learn something a bit is important.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I definitely agree with that, right? That you come to the neighborhood, you come and you take yourself there, and by taking yourself there, you change something. So thank you to Emily Barney, who's been really on the chat, dropping all of the links to the action kit.
Great.
Thank you, thank you. We will also be following up, and I'll send each of you in the audience an email link to this action kit. So I'm really on board here. Like, we're all going to visit a neighborhood. We're all going to like do an expansion of our worldview. We're all going to go like learn something. And this is the action kit for how to do so ethically and equitably in our very own home cities. So we'll go to Poet very shortly, but right before that, I believe our final question is coming from our very own publisher of The Rail, Fong H. Bui. Fong, you should be able to turn on your microphone now. Let's see.
Hey, you guys. Thank you. Thank you, Tonika.
Hi, Fong.
Thank you so much, Lee. I think our friend Dawoon is in the audience.
Yes, he just sent a message. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, I'm so starstruck.
So yes, you know, I first learned about Englewood, believe it or not, through my love for basketball.
This makes sense. This makes sense.
Well, I love Derrick Rose, you
Right.
know, one of the native. I've been following his career since he was playing for Memphis Tiger.
Oh.
And similarly with Anthony Davis, you know, who went on play for Kentucky Wildcats. And then now actually in the NBA final, the Lakers trying to take them to their 17th championship, you know, it's intense. I was late last night watching the whole game. But I meant to say this, your work sort of is so important right now when you was referring what the work that you do, both of you actually, it's so essential the time that we're going through now, because I mentioned it before, during the Great Depression, one of the things that you know, Eleanor Roosevelt sort of behind the scene encouraged FDR to generate WPA, the federal project, #1 particularly. We tend to forget that 4-point-something billion allocated for the Emergency Relief Appropriate Act of 1937, and certainly 27 million was approved to spend for the Farm Security Administration, which a lot of photographers like Walker Evans, Dorothy Land, and endless other was sent to photograph these rural poor people, you know? And it's interesting because they were captured with such dignity. I mean, if you go back and look at The Family of Man, when Edward Teichon was the curator of photography MoMA, 1955, that was the most important show in the world. It's still proven today, to this day, one of the most popular exhibition ever put it together. It traveled 30-something country. It's so intense. So what your work is important in that sense. It's also give the dignity of the neighborhood, the people and whatnot. Just not, you know, we can't afford to not do it, you know. My question is very simple. I had this crazy friend of an Australian artist and filmmaker. Charlie's know this. I think in visited once. Have you ever met George Gitos, Lee, Tonika? He made a film about the neighborhood in, I think several years ago. It's called White Light.
No.
George Gitos, Gittoes.
Okay.
Spent a lot of years and times in Afghanistan, in Iraq, sort of became part of the neighborhood and being approved by the people in order to tell the story. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's called White Light.
White Light. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he got to know, what's the gang member, the famous one? Is it Solida? Yeah, I mean, he's really got to know the neighborhoods very, very well. Very interesting. Anyway, next time when we invite him and to the social environment, I would love to introduce you to him.
I would love that.
Yeah. So that wasn't a question. It's just a remark of great appreciation for what you do.
Thank you for it. The question was, did we know about it? So that was your question.
No,
and I didn't, but now I do. Thank you.
It's important work. And again, things get done in the margin, not in the center. The center takes what we do sometimes without giving us the credit. And that's exactly what happened to you. And was very saddened by the story, but it didn't discourage you, which is what's important about it, is that we are determined to do the work that we do. So thank you, Tonika. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you. Thank you. What helps me not get discouraged is having connections with people like you all who support and appreciate and uplift my work. Because if it was not for that, then, you know, I wouldn't have had the courage to call out a large outlet institution like the New York Times. But I was able to feel comfortable doing that because I have access to people who share with me their appreciation of my work. So thank you all.
Thank you.
We shall not be derailed, Lee. Do not be derailed.
I loved it. I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you, Malvika.
For those comments. I also want to say it takes profound moral courage to call out elite media establishments. So, you know, whatever we can do to like highlight that moral courage, it's like, it, you know, it's phenomenal. I'm very excited. Yeah, so I think without further ado, we should move to our poet laureate of this lunchtime. So at the Rail, we have a tradition that we used to have pre-COVID of ending lunch with a poem in our offices. And we've been lucky enough to carry that out into and continue it into our Zoom events. So today I'm thrilled to welcome the poet I.S. Jones to the stage. I met I.S. Jones at a reading some years ago, and immediately when I saw her, I was just like struck. I was like, who is this incredible, deep, lyrical woman? So you'll see that in just a moment. But before she reads for us, I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. So I.S. Jones is an American-Nigerian poet and music journalist. She's a graduate fellow at the Watering Hole and holds fellowships from Callaloo Boat Writers Retreat and the Brooklyn Poets. I.S. hosts a month-long workshop every April called The Singing Bullet and co-edited the Young African Poets Anthology. She's a book editor with Indolent Books, editor at 2035 Africa, and Anthology of Contemporary Poet, and freelances for Vinyl Me Please, Complex, Earmilk, NBC News, Think, and elsewhere. Aside from that, her poetic works have appeared in Guernica, Washington Square Review, Hayden's Ferry Review, The Rumpus, The Offing, Shade Literary Arts, and elsewhere. Her work was chosen as a finalist by Khadija Queen for the 2020 Sublingua Prize for Poetry, and nothing but illustrious guests. She is currently an MFA candidate in poetry at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she is the inaugural Kemper-Knapp University Fellowship recipient. She splits her time between Southern California and New York. Give it up for I.S. Jones. And you should be able, Itiola, to turn on your mic.
Yeah, we're good.
Oh, perfect, great.
Thank you so much. Is it Tonika or Tonika?
Tonika, like your toe, then your knee, and cup.
That's so charming. Thank you so much for this really beautiful and wonderful conversation. It was just such a delight to be able to sit here and just absorb all of this and learn about Chicago, I think in a lot of ways in the way that it's meant to be learned through the people. So I'm grateful for this, and thank you, Lee, for this conversation. And thank you everyone for being here. I'm just gonna read 3 poems. Yeah, I wanted to try and find poems that fit the theme, but I'm just gonna read what I have, yeah. I wrote this poem right after Donald Trump was elected. Self-portrait of the Black girl becoming the beast everyone thought she was. The moon is my first emotion, then beast, then happy rage depending on a zealous appetite. I pull bobby pins from the kitchen of my scalp, tear out nails one by one, pluck out the lashes, yank docile teeth, fold the skin back by the mouth. I release my human flesh in night drops. Blue wolves circle the block in acute madness, dreaming in gun smoke and new names to pick their fangs clean. The moon sways blood and voices behind yellow eyes. Each of the names bow inside me. I grin, and the moon is an anxious pulse. I a hungry one. In overexposure, the moon could make anything feral. I only eat a macabre light, and the night is so sweet on my tongue, fear makes the blue wolves multiply. The moon rummages through the light of my name like a vagrant beggar, tills the blood in my four-legged body. Born non-white and woman call the thing what it is, hostile, uppity, neck rolls, hips without the logic, mean mugs, vengeful at the root. But you've only known my mercy, a snatched tongue, polite hands, crossed legs, a settled throat, plea and please, two hands on the same body, never my unhinged joy. In my first language, the cease of blood before writhing, the pushback, knuckling of bone and sinew, a blue neck caught inside a maw, and how each muscle negotiates before severing. God of the faithful night, teach me to lose my mouth in reverie, to laugh in my predator's blood, to let it fill my belly, how it trickles through the floorboards of my teeth. So this other poem, so I have the next poem on the arm insert birth control, for those who don't know what it is. And I've had it now, this is my third time replacing it. And I've been trying to like write this poem about the feminine body and sex and girlhood, etc. Next planon. I lay on the exam table and the doctor injects my left arm with 3 cc's of lidocaine. Ask me how I know the precise measurement. I've been here before. Every 3 years I am cut open and renew this covenant with my body. What was panic has become ritual. To replace my small savior size of a matchstick and open for its successor. We wait for the lidocaine to spread its veil from the needle's circumference. First a pinch, and the fluid enters me. I tell my doctor pain is less impressive when you surrender to its whim. Like being trapped in a car headed for collision, how it's best to relax the muscles to avoid more damage. Or the day I forfeited my virginity to my boyfriend who's too old for a high school senior. Splitting bliss like the spirit overtaking me. Crimson stain pressed to his bed, proof of my indiscretion. I was eager to enter the tribe of girlhood, to gossip about sex and the pain of it, how I believed becoming a woman meant wielding my body like a blade into a lover. A scalpel drags its silent note across my inner arm and she distracts me. When was your last period? Once the body held inside all its questions and presented onto me a clot so luminous I thought it could be alive. How long have you been on this birth control? Since M pressured me into it. M slipped a disc in their back and said they couldn't feel anything. Their pleasure, my burden, a body is open for each foreign defender it came to mutiny. Pills that voided my stomach, weeping and bloating, spells of rage, food tasting like gravel. I wanted what any woman wants, protection and pleasure. I sought out a small savior adorned in white, a wet opening of the body's first secret. A lover slips a finger inside me and something in them is undone. Work cream stains my inner thigh. They tell me my pussy is beautiful. I tell them one day they'll notice I don't move when they touch me. It's not out, my doctor says. There's still some blood in the way. It's a little stuck. The doctor rummages inside my skin's pocket, 3 years of red tissue anchored to its protector. Do you want children someday? I am the age my mother was when she had my sister and I. In her girlhood, she wanted a big family and a bigger house to keep everyone in. Then she met my father and the window of her life closed. Body of doors. I have loved others with a rough sweetness and moved with you as though your machinery was something to be ashamed of. I have fucked people I know I would never want children from. I know by now I would be rooted by clarity, certain I would want a cooing face staring back. but I'm nearly 30 and finally belong to myself completely. I admit to you I am selfish with a freedom that I feared arrived late. And once I did want the dream of domesticity. I weep to my therapist that I dreamed of a lover on a train platform and the face of a little girl, half mine, half the moon. The doctor pulls me back into the room, tugging at my arm until at last she unsheaths the small wand and lifts it into the light as if birthed from my arm. Then a new instrument is wrestled into my skin. I feel nothing, just a roving in the distance like shadows and dense fog. It's finished. The bandage closes its reach over the wound. My last poem. So my mother was born in Edo State in Nigeria, and she was a child when the Biafran War, the Nigerian Civil War, broke out. And she has this scar that goes down the side of her mouth, where she was jumped and beaten and left for dead by guerrilla soldiers. And I had been trying for years to try and write what happened to her and how that very specific moment in history inadvertently made me an American. So I opted to say violence made me American, so to speak. And this poem is forthcoming in Muscle magazine. Self-portrait as Itoli. I am a spell of 6 letters. I have a name that begins and ends countries. What could end a country begins a mother. A girl child then, she fetched water for home. Home means what you love cannot return the same. Nigeria, her first love opened by war. War only understands thirst. Soldiers did too. She saw them but couldn't outrun their hands. Hands that tore open her mouth, stomped out her face. She mouths to me the word miracle, her lips resisting the dull pull of scarred flesh. You're all I have. Never go to Nigeria or I will bury my eldest child. I am a spell of 6 letters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, IS. IS Jones, everybody. And thank you so much, Tonika, and thank you to Lee in absentia. Both of you, all 3 of you, for speaking with such rigor and grace. And thank you to all of you who were able to come out and spend this afternoon with us. I'm so happy you were able to. This month, we're celebrating the 20th year anniversary of this publication, The Rail, which started off so recently in October 2000. And just we're spending a little time thinking about institutional memory and looking back at all of the art and culture and novels and parties and conversations and this community of artists and writers and friends, which has only grown in the past 8 months of quarantine, and sort of looking forward to the next 20 years as well of publishing The Rail. Always free, always independent. So I just wanted to honor that for a moment. We're so happy you're all here to celebrate that with us. Please join us again tomorrow for the new social environment, when we will be joined by director and cinematographer Jeff Orlowski, who will join our friend Paul D. Miller, known also as DJ Spooky, for a conversation. That will close with a poetry reading from Lawrence Griffin. Also, please note that that event will take place at 2 p.m. Eastern rather than our usual 1 p.m. gathering time, but sit easy because it will be, as always, right here in the Zoom. Thank you all for tuning in. You should now be able to activate your microphones if you desire, and say goodbye as you leave.
Thank you so much, Malvika, for putting all of this together. You're incredible.
She is. She's amazing. Thank you all.
Thank you
It's
so
such a
much.
pleasure
Thank
to be
you.
here.
Thank you, Tonika. Thank you, IS.
Tonika
and
Thank
IS and
you.
Lee and Malvika.
Oh.
Thank you to everyone.